So I was requested to check out Keith Wood's on capitalism, so I decided to check out his channel. I see that he's obviously done a good few videos on critiquing capitalism or whatever. Let's just get straight to this argument.
Human civilization is presently living on the upper shoulders of some incredibly steep geometric growth curves. We've used more resources since 1950 than in all preceding human history.
So the problem with his argument is the fact that we haven't been living under this capitalist system. In fact, the British Industrial Revolution was dominated by mercantilism. That's a whole other story in and of itself. Even then, the United States of America is a mixed economy today, likewise the same with Great Britain. The 1950s was a period when even the United States of America faced the higher tax rates, etc. And you've been facing all of these subsidies. What you've got today is a system of corporatism, in other words, rewarding failure and punishing success, and as a result of all the government subsidies you end up facing all the waste, etc. We've seen that in the 19th century, and of course I've pointed this out in a video before, so I don't really need to go into it. And in today's mixed economy, what you're faced with is the economic calculation problem. We see that through all the public ownership, etc., where government intervenes, controlling much of the economy. You've even got an over-regulated private sector. So where's he going with his argument? How is it the collapse of capitalism when it's not even a free market?
Forests are shrinking, ice caps are melting, coral reefs are dying, fisheries are becoming depleted, species are vanishing, deserts are growing, and fresh water is under more and more demand from agriculture, industry, and burgeoning cities.
So it's just the usual climate alarmism nonsense. 500,000 years ago, you've seen CO2 levels more than twice as high as they are today, but you never saw life going extinct. According to their rhetoric, life would go extinct. Well, that's not what happened. They merely hardened their shells, the creatures in the sea at that time, and of course they adapted and changed with the environment. Of course, he ignores growth elsewhere in the world. It's not as simple as just looking at the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, etc. Water temperatures change across the world. Things are not simplistic. It's like comparing that of the Antarctic to that of the Arctic. They're completely different. So in other words, they just choose things that suit their narrative, and that's all it's been a case of. It's just like how they claimed that, the polar bear population's in decline. Well, it just wasn't the case. It contradicted them. The polar bear population grew from more than 5,000 in the 1950s to more than 25,000 by 2005. And if you want to know how you put these people on the spot, it's just ask them, how the hell is their socialism, which is basically controls over the economy, how's that going to make life better for people? Because with socialism and just the mixed economy in general, you're faced with the economic calculation problem. The natural state of public ownership of property, which is exactly what he's more or less calling out for as far as I'm concerned, means that you're going to be faced with price controls. And yes, it does mean governmental ownership. It doesn't matter about all their theoretical nonsense that's never existed about this workers' ownership of the means of production. And again, I've pointed this out before and I'll point it out again. The market economy is defining capitalism. The reason why they try to bastardize the entire meaning of socialism around that of the market is because they know they cannot defend socialism itself. They know fine well that central planning of the economy was a disastrous failure. That's why they're trying to manipulate the entire meaning of socialism and trying to fit it around the market, which is a contradiction of everything socialism stands for. When you're going about this whole thing on climate change, just ask them, how's socialism going to solve the problem when you're speaking about resource usage, etc.? Because the bottom line is, socialism would inevitably lead to that of resource misallocation, the economic calculation problem.
These are warning signs of a world having breached its carrying capacity. The documentary Planet of the Humans, produced by Michael Moore, has caused huge controversy since its release.
Michael Moore, of all people, the same person who struck so-called controversy when it came to Cuban healthcare. I wouldn't even take anything Michael Moore says seriously. He just spouts utter garbage, and he is the typical champagne socialist that lives off the fruits of what capitalism has created. Meanwhile, he preaches about socialism, and there you have the Cuban people protesting against socialism, and for very good reason.
The documentary makes two central claims. First, that green energy from solar panels to electric cars are a sham that do not do any less harm to the environment than the fossil fuels they claim to replace. and in fact often use more of those fossil fuels than would have been used without them.
They clearly don't understand the amount of things that you use today, such as clothing, etc, etc. So many things, even basketballs, doesn't matter what it is, there's so many things that are being produced off the back of fossil fuels. You're going to end up taking, so many things away, reducing our standards of living. For the sake of what? Where's there actual evidence to suggest that fossil fuels is the cause of such damage? Well, like I said, climate has been changing for, long before mankind has existed on this planet Earth. That's what contradicts them. And their narrative is to basically claim that with the rise of CO2, that this somehow influences temperature. But this is false. Geologists themselves would agree the temperature drives the CO2, and it's been in that pattern for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if we go down the road of that argument, again, how is socialism going to solve their problems? That's what the real agenda is behind all of this. That's all they're trying to say. Why else do you think he's got a video titled about capitalism? Because the real agenda here is not about, we need to save the planet. The real agenda here is just anti-capitalism, to spout the idea that somehow socialism is going to solve his problems. The greatest disaster to the planet, one only needs to look at that of the Gulf of Mexico, the spill caused by the state-owned oil company. And if not that, then of course you could turn to other examples where the Soviet Union redirected the rivers that fed the Aral Sea, and as a result the Aral Sea dried up by 1960 and contaminated the land, devastated the local fishing industry between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and of course left the land completely contaminated, and it was a disaster. The same Soviet Union that was using nuclear bombs for mining with. I wouldn't even take anything this person says seriously, because the record of failure of socialism has been catastrophic. Where can he point to you on this planet Earth where socialism, by evidence, has been better for the planet? He can't point that out anywhere. Another thing that I must note is the fact that economics is a study about how you achieve the maximum results whilst using the fewest resources possible, and there is nothing more efficient than that of a free market economy. You do not live under a free market economy, and these people always love to use the term, it's for profits, as if to say, it's all about greed and all the rest of this nonsense. What they don't seem to understand is that in order for you to maximize your profits, and this is talking about that of a capitalist system even, to maximize your profits, you must minimize your costs. That means using fewer resources, and that's exactly what John Davis and Rockefeller did. That's why he was way ahead of his competition, simply because of the fact that he was efficient. He knew what he was doing. He doesn't understand the very fact that his socialism would end up using more resources, and of course being faced with the economic calculation problem again. You can check out my videos on the economic calculation problem. I've gone through it.
Second, big environmental organisations, by promoting solar and wind power, have sold their souls to billionaire investors. Green energy has become another means of profit for the capitalists, a new market to commodify and exploit. Environmental organisations are largely in the pocket of people who are profiting off the growth of these industries.
Folk, as problematic as this economy is today with corporatism, which he thinks is somehow capitalism, he doesn't even understand what profits are. Profits is information you gather from the consumer, what they want and what they don't want. If you look out there on the market today to so many products because of fossil fuels, then of course these corporations etc. are going to profit from it, because in order for these products to be produced, and since there's demand for such products, then of course it's going to be a profitable industry. We should be moving towards something like nuclear energy, and that is something that the free market would do. He's trying to say that somehow you're living under a capitalist system. You're not, because if you were living under a capitalist system, we would be turning more towards nuclear energy. I wonder how this Irish sounding individual would cope with the so-called solar power energy etc, given the fact he's from a similar country to that of my own, like Scotland, where we don't see much of the sun. Yeah, it's just so unreliable, it's unreal, and it doesn't produce the same amount of energy, anywhere near the same.
Meanwhile, the world's ever-increasing population is declared the elephant in the room, and what we really need to deal with in order to tackle our diminishing resources. Politicians on the right lie to us by underplaying the seriousness of the environmental crisis we face, or put their hope in the free market developing a silver bullet to solve those problems.
What free market is he even going on about? We don't even live under a free market. How the hell was it free market when you've been seeing interest rates being controlled and manipulated above or below market value? You don't even have free market money, and your entire private sector's over-regulated by the state. And again, how is socialism going to solve the problem? Socialism's actually been the main cause of such inefficiency in the economy. He hasn't got anywhere to show for where socialism's been efficient.
The left, meanwhile, celebrates a new green capitalism and a new capitalist ethic of sustainability, which is nothing more than a sham.
I don't know where he's going about with his argument, because capitalism is all about finding innovative ways to improve things, such as what they do with the plastic waste, such as grinding it down, I'm sure it is, and how they use it in the roads. They were doing that in England, and I'm pretty sure elsewhere, etc. Because if anything, it was socialism that restricted the innovator who would have had cars running on water, prohibiting the free market. Actually, his socialism's the cause of the problem in the mixed economy, and he's basically trying to blame capitalism.
Even with the slowly declining growth rates that are forecast, the world population is increasing by about 80 million per year every year, and projections show the world population growing from its current rate of 7.8 billion to 9.8 billion in 2050 and to 11.5 billion in 2100. Put this in perspective, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, the world population was 700 million. This vast population increase has been made possible by the easily accessible energy provided by our use of fossil fuels.
The reason why it was made possible is because of the improvement of technology, etc., thanks to capitalism, the ability for people to make something of themselves, because it's all down to the question of scale. Because if you compare that of living under feudalism, then contrast that moving in a direction where you see more of a private sector, etc., then of course you would see the growth of, people throughout the Industrial Revolution, because you're getting rid of the common malnutrition diseases. Well, how terrible life must have been. But he completely ignores the very fact of something that completely contradicts him. A place like Hong Kong or free market capitalist Singapore, where they've had practically no natural resources and they made something of themselves. Just look at their living standards and how they improved since 1950s. And then contrast that to anti-capitalist Great Britain and anti-capitalist United States of America that's been using up so much resources and being heavily dependent upon natural resources.
But we are now running into ecological limits, which mean lessening our reliance on these fuels is essential. The real elephant in the room in our discussions about the environment is that we live under an economic system that necessitates endless growth.
You live under a mixed economy, and the fact that you're telling people that you live under a capitalist system is a downright lie, claiming that you live under late stage capitalism. No, you don't. You've basically got a private sector that's over-regulated by the state, and you had all the government subsidies, etc. It's got nothing to do with capitalism. In fact, that is socialist, especially that of what led to the financial crisis of 2008.
As environmentalist Gus Speth writes, economic growth may be the world's secular religion, but for much of the world it is a god that is failing.
I want you people to think about that very carefully. And just think about that for a minute. He has a problem with your economic growth. He has a problem with you improving your material standards of living. To a rational-minded person, they would look at what free market capitalist Hong Kong achieved between 1948 to 1997. Vastly improved their material standards of living, vastly improved the wealth of the masses, whilst having practically no natural resources. That's what a capitalist system does. Basically speaking negatively about your growth. Is he trying to say that we should just live life stagnant? He's actually got a problem with people seeing their living standards improve. To a rational-minded person who understands economics, what we should be doing is moving towards a capitalist system, having a more efficient economy, using fewer resources that way, by maximising profits, by minimising your costs. In other words, using fewer resources. That's the solution.
Underperforming for most of the world's people, and for those in affluent societies, now creating more problems than it is solving. The never-ending drive to grow the overall US economy undermines communities and the environment. It fuels a ruthless international search for energy and other resources. It fails at generating the needed jobs, and it rests on a manufactured consumerism that is not meeting the deepest human needs.
Each and every single individual of society all have different needs and wants. He's trying to pass off human beings as if we're all the same, as if we're just a group, as if you just provide for the collective. We're not a collective, we are individuals. And this idea that you just subordinate the needs and wants of individuals and place the group above the individual is exactly what has led down the road of totalitarian dictatorships, and exactly what led down the road of the economic central planning that wasted such vast natural resources.
Psychologists have pointed out, for example, that while economic output per person in the United States has risen sharply in recent decades, there has been no increase in life satisfaction.
I don't care what psychologists said. Psychologists don't even know anything about economics, not unless they study that of economics itself. A psychologist doesn't matter. In economic reality, economics itself doesn't have feelings. Your good intentions are faced with dire consequences. Let's use this example as a dire consequence. Critiquing capitalism. You want to get rid of the private sector, you're going to be left running the printing press. It'll soar inflation through the roof. And what happens every single time a socialist regime does that? They try to control the prices by artificially reducing the prices below market value, setting down price ceilings, and you're faced with the price shortage problems. And of course, being faced with the economic calculation problem, you find resource misallocation.
Often, in discussions about capitalism, there's a tendency to equate capitalism with the market, and to see capitalism merely as a system allowing freedom of exchange between individuals.
That is capitalism. Individualism, as I've pointed out numerous times before, defines the free market economy. That's what capitalism is. You look at the definition of collectivism, and you'll find that it's the same definition as socialism practically. And every single source that you could possibly find of collectivism, it's a word synonymous to the word socialism. Just about every source that you could possibly find in that. Capitalism has to fall under one of the two. Capitalism cannot be both. So capitalism is either collectivist or it is individualist. Are you honestly trying to tell me that you can correlate capitalism, a word that is antinomous to the word collectivism, by this evidence here? Are you trying to tell me that you can correlate capitalism to that of collectivism, even although collectivism defies everything that capitalism stands for and means? Again, the definition of individualism is very clear. It's not slightly clear, it's very clear. And even the definition of what a market economy is very clear. This is exactly what we're faced with. Complete ignorance.
Because the growth imperative of capitalism is fueled by usury, the practice of lending money at interest, there is necessarily never enough money available to pay back existing debt. This creates the need to expand the economy to create more value with which to pay back existing debt.
Folk, the entire system of fractional reserve banking is bloody well socialist. They took away your free market money. Free market money is basically money determined by the people. How the hell was a central banking system, keyword there, central, political centralisation, big part of what defines socialism, how the hell was a political centralised central bank taking away free market money and imposing upon the market a currency that the market did not ask for? How did that become capitalism? For then the central banks to encourage government borrowing and spending. That government borrowing and spending is socialism. That's not capitalism. They just don't have a clue what they're bloody well talking about. They don't even have a clue what socialism is.
In the absence of any limits or barriers, the need to reinvest in order to remain a capitalist propels capitalism to expand at a compound rate. This then creates a perpetual need to find new fields of activity to absorb the reinvested capital. Hence what has been called the capital surplus absorption problem. Capitalists are always producing surpluses in the form of profit.
Profits is merely something that the consumer is telling the market what their needs and wants are. See, if you remove the information of profits, there's no way for you to operate anything efficiently. It's why socialism is faced with the economic calculation problem, which is why his entire argument is upside down. Oppose the consumer and essentially, well, you're going down the road of inefficiency. He's talking about a surplus. If you create surplus waste, that's not because you're making profits. What's making profits got to do with it? It's just like the argument Second Thought came out with, claiming that look at Amazon and look at all the surplus waste that they're creating. Oh, it's all the fault of capitalism. They forgot to tell you the very fact that it was socialist government regulation that actually encouraged and created that very problem. But of course, they love to just project the blame off onto capitalism.
When there is no population growth, there is little demand for new housing, severely affecting the construction industry. Fewer new households means less purchasing of furniture and appliances.
Well, that's brilliant, because it was all thanks to your socialism that overregulated the private sector and restricted the market from being able to build more at a quicker rate so that supply can keep up with the demand. And the other part of the problem was your socialism that enticed them to come flooding into this country to begin with, because of all your socialist welfare redistribution. And the inflationary problem is the fault of your socialism, blaming capitalism for something that socialism created.
Prominent EU leaders speak openly about the need to transform Europe into Euro-Africa in the coming decade and compensate for a declining native population with a constant supply of African labour. Ultimately, nationalists who push back on this will face the same realisation as honest environmentalists. Without ever expanding growth, including an expansion of population through the reserve population of Africa, the system will collapse. There cannot be a steady state or a no-growth capitalism due to the very nature of capitalism. We are now hurtling, inexorably, toward ecological and demographic collapse.
No, the economy will collapse because of what your socialism is doing. Your socialism was responsible for fixing the interest rates below market value and creating the boom and bust cycle. Your socialism led to that of the Great Depression. Your socialism was precisely what gave rise to corporatism and led us down the road of the financial crisis of 2008. Just like it was your socialism that created the inflationary problem, caused the fractional reserve banking by taking away capitalism's free market money. And then after you create all those problems, you then project the blame off onto capitalism and basically pretend that socialism isn't present. How did you draw to the logical conclusion that a mixed economy became a full-blown capitalist economy? It's like saying that socialism's never existed, or that it's not present today. So what the bloody hell then do you call a government-run fire department then? What the hell do you call a state-run police department? What on earth do you call state-run education, the NHS then? Make logical, rational sense, but you don't. Anyway, folk, I don't know if you've got anything you would like to add yourself to that. It's arguably really, it's just the typical ignorance and typical stupidity from these type of people. It's like I said, whenever you see the arguments on climate change, etc, just ask them, how's socialism going to solve their problems? There's the laugh of the century. Anyway, folk, if you've got anything you'd like to add in yourself, comment in the comment section below. Be sure to like the video, share the video or whatnot, and of course I'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you for watching, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.